Supreme Court will consider a challenge to a Trump-era ban on so-called bump stocks.
The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the Trump-era ban on bump stocks today.
But there was not a clear answer, and it did not appear clear that they are willing to go there because of the text of the law.
Gun owner says, wait a minute, the ATF doesn't have that power to change the law like that.
That's the argument with bump stocks. All they do is allow you to pull a trigger many times faster than a human normally could.
While some conservatives were skeptical, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson called bump stocks the kind of weapons Congress was intending to prohibit because of the damage they cause. Federal bump stock ban. The legitimacy of a federal ban on bump stock devices, which enable semi-auto rifles to fire hundreds of rounds per minute, appeared to be a point of contention for a split Supreme Court on Wednesday. The devices, according to liberal justices, were precisely what Congress intended when it banned mash guns a long time ago. Nonetheless, a few conservative judges claimed that the text of the statute was unclear. After a gunman used bump stocks to open fire on the attendees of an outdoor music festival in Las Vegas in 2017, the Trump administration decided to outlaw them. This was the bloodiest mass slaying in modern American history, leaving hundreds of people injured and slaying scores of people. Following the tragic slaying at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida in early 2018, the initiative was rekindled. After Congress and some courts rejected earlier arm control measures, the bump stock ban is one of the few actions taken by the federal government to address the trauma caused by armed crime in the United States. Bump stocks are illegal in several states and the District of Columbia, but even though over a dozen states and the federal government individually prohibit their use, a decision that overturns the nationwide ban might make it more challenging for the federal government to impose restrictions on the availability of other weapons and accessories. Several liberal and conservative justices voiced concerns during the oral argument on Wednesday regarding hazardous weapons and the potential for bloodshed when using a rifle equipped with a bump stock. Their queries, however, left open the possibility that the court, with its 6-3 conservative supermajority, would sustain the ban.
Supreme Court will consider a challenge to a Trump-era ban on so-called bump stocks.
Including the Supreme Court has ever suggested that you got a Second Amendment right to own a machine gun.
The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments in a case that could change gun rights across the country.
The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the Trump-era ban on bump stocks today.
The federal ban on these rifle attachments. So why is it hearing the case now?
Conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett expressed her concerns that Congress's mash gun ban did not specifically address bump stocks, even if she is entirely sympathetic to the government's position. Conservative Justice Neil M. Gorsuch stated that he certainly understands why these items should be made illegal, but he urged that politicians should make this clear. Bump stocks are the kind of weapons that Congress was intending to prohibit because of the damage they cause, according to liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. The torrent of bullets blasted by weapons outfitted with the devices is in the heartland of the concerns lawmakers had in mind when they enacted the prohibition, according to liberal Judge Elena Kagan. Austin arm dealer Michael Cargill, a veteran of the U.S. Army, contested the Trump administration's regulations when he was made to give up 2 bump stocks. Cargill claims that when the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives expanded the scope of long-standing federal restrictions on mash guns to include the devices, it was acting beyond its jurisdiction. This term, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on 2 arm control cases. Additionally, a number of challenges challenging the authority of federal agencies have been brought before the court. Conservatives have long targeted these cases because they believe that the government overregulates. Cargill is represented by the New Civil Liberties Alliance, one of the right-wing legal groups also spearheading an attempt to reverse the 40-year-old Chevron court ruling, which frequently mandates courts to yield to agency officials' knowledge when interpreting statutes. Before the Supreme Court's historic ruling in 2022 increasing arm rights by requiring the government to provide historical precedents when defending laws that restrict Second Amendment rights. Cargill filed a lawsuit to retrieve his bump stock devices. The validity of a statute prohibiting arm ownership by those covered by domestic crime protection orders is at issue in the other arm case the court is hearing this term, which centers on that decision. On the other hand, the Second Amendment was not specifically addressed in the case that the court heard on Wednesday. Rather, the justices looked into whether ATF agents correctly applied a 1986 law that prohibits non-military individuals from obtaining machine weapons. How a bump stock works and whether using one corresponds to a single function of the trigger were major topics of dispute. At different points during the dispute, the topics covered included syntax, physics, and arm mechanics. In one discussion, Kagan and Cargill's lawyer, Jonathan Mitchell, alternatively showed off how to fire an arm fitted with the device with their hands. The typical rifle stock that presses up on the slayer's shoulder is replaced by molded pieces of metal or plastic called bump stocks. The mechanism uses the recoil of an arm to its advantage, causing the weapon to bump or bounce quickly off the slayer's trigger finger. Bump stock rifles can fire 400 to 800 rounds per minute, which is about the same rate as military mash guns.
Gun owner says, wait a minute, the ATF doesn't have that power to change the law like that.
And there's concern that they could be much more dangerous if the wrong person gets the hands on them.
Because we don't know what exactly states and the federal government can prohibit people from owning.
Divergent views. Mash guns are defined by the National Firearms Act as any weapon that can shoot, is made to shoot, or is easily made to shoot automatically more than one shot, without manual reloading, by a single function of the trigger, in addition to any component made specifically for use in converting a weapon into a mash gun. The Biden administration told the court that the technologies allow a rifle to fire several shots automatically, and that a single move commences and maintains the firing, opposing the Trump administration's view. Principal Deputy Solicitor General Brian Fletcher stated, "As long as the slayer maintains that steady forward pressure, the rifle will fire continuously until it runs out of bullets, and it will empty a 100-round magazine like the ones used in the Las Vegas slaying in about 10 seconds. Those weapons accomplish precisely what Congress intended to forbid when it passed the mash gun ban."
Those are accessories to semi-automatic rifles that increase the rate of fire.
Gun owner is arguing, and I think this is a pretty compelling argument in this Supreme Court.
That's the argument with bump stocks. All they do is allow you to pull a trigger many times faster than a human normally could.
But there was not a clear answer, and it did not appear clear that they are willing to go there because of the text of the law.
Careful who you associate with. And the NRA says, hey, that's coercion by the state. It infringes on our First Amendment rights.
Former Texas Solicitor General Mitchell vehemently disagreed with the depiction, claiming that multiple manual trigger pulls, not one single pull, caused the rapid fire. Just one shot per function of the trigger because the trigger must reset after every shot and must function again before another shot can be fired, he explained, referring to a rifle fitted with a bump stock. Over time, the ATF's evaluation of bump stock devices and legal interpretation has evolved. The government declared in 2003 that an early model was not a mash gun, as it could only fire one shot with a single pull of the trigger. After 3 years, the government reversed course and categorized the early model, which included an internal spring, as a mash gun. Cargill's lawyers point out that the federal government did not classify newer models of the devices, which lacked the internal spring, as mash guns for almost 10 years, from 2008 to 2017. 500,000 American bump stocks were purchased in that period. The bump stock prohibition imposed by former President Donald Trump allowed owners until March 2019 to destroy or surrender such devices. This allowed 500,000 people to face prosecution if they bought the devices before the regulations were altered. Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh questioned the government's changing interpretation of the statute, arguing that bump stocks were legal under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Fletcher argued that the ATF was making amends for prior errors similar to the Supreme Court's approach when determining erroneous legislation. The conservative members of the court supported textualism, a style of interpretation that looks at the language of the statute under review and ignores the intentions of the legislators or the implications of the ruling. However, the judges disagreed on how to interpret this specific statute. Gorsuch objected to the government's interpretation to include bump stocks, while Kagan, despite acknowledging her role as a good textualist, believed the devices should be covered by the Act. Common sense and textualism are not mutually exclusive, according to Kagan. At some point, you have to read statutes with a little common sense and realize that what this statute is talking about is a weapon that can fire a lot of bullets with a single human action. Neither in district court nor before a unanimous panel of the conservative U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit did Cargill's appeal to the bump stock ban succeed. However, the Fifth Circuit overturned that decision following a rehearing of the case by all of the judges. Because the slayer must maintain manual forward pressure on the barrel and manual backward pressure with the trigger finger to continue firing after the slayer pulls the trigger, Judge Jennifer Elrod wrote for the 8-judge majority that the definition of mash gun in the statute does not include bump stocks. Although 5 additional judges believed that the concept was unclear, they also stated that Cargill was entitled to a favorable outcome in criminal law matters due to a rule of interpretation. Judge Stephen Higginson disapproved of the majority's use of the rule to rewrite a vital public safety statute and legalize an instrument of mass murder, joining 2 of his colleagues in their disagreement. Subsequently, the Justice Department requested the Supreme Court to become involved. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.